There. My name is Valerie Hendrix. I am a computer systems engineer from Berkeley Lab. Today I will be sharing with you how myself and my co-authors tackle the challenges of earth science data synthesis by providing the insights we have gained from our different approaches to applying data and metadata standards to earth science data. This presentation will first describe the challenge to data synthesis for earth science projects and define some concepts to get us all on the same page. I will then introduce several Department of Energy projects whose approaches to data standards application I will discuss. Finally, I will discuss some future work that will build on these project experiences and insights. Earth science data sets are generated by an iterative methodology where models guide measurements and vice versa. This approach uses and generates diverse data from multidisciplinary earth sciences, including hydrology, ecology, climate, geology, and so on. These data are diverse and complex and are a significant component of earth science big data challenge. The challenge falls in these problem areas, which makes integration of diverse, complex earth science data difficult, thus hindering scientific discovery. Data is distributed across different heterogeneous archives and databases. Data is diverse, coming from multidisciplinary earth sciences and can be in different scales, volumes, and data types. There also is a lot of variability in vocabulary used, such as variable names, measurement units, and how locations are described. Finally, due to the distributed, diverse, and variable nature of the data, discovery of data for scientific analysis is very difficult. Now that I have discussed earth science data challenges, I want to define some concepts that are important to understand for this talk. A data provider is a researcher who collects data that is relevant for their domain science, and a data consumer can be a person or software that receives data for discovery and analysis. When talking about the structure of data, we use standards or reporting formats. Both are designed by consensus. A data standard is a definition or format that has been approved by a recognized standards organization and can be developed over decades. Standards not only exist for data formats, but also for programming languages, operating systems, and communication protocols. A reporting format is a set of guidelines and format for structuring data and metadata provided by a data provider to a data repository. These are community-driven data guidelines developed to promote well-structured data where no standard is available. For the purposes of this talk, I will use standards to mean both reporting formats and standards. Standards can be used to define the structure of both data and metadata. Metadata is information about the data and the context of the data. Data are measurements and observations such as time series, images, and genomics. My co-authors and I are on the data management teams of the U.S. Department of Energy research projects listed on this slide. We have faced this data challenge in which data synthesis is essential to addressing the science. I will be discussing 4 approaches to using standards taken by the following 5 projects. NGEE Tropics is a team science project to project carbon cycle in the tropics under future climate. Models inform observations across multiple tropical sites. AmeriFlux is a network of independent researchers studying carbon, water, energy, and energy exchange between atmosphere and land surface in diverse systems across the Americas. iNIADS is a Department of Energy early career research project using data-driven approaches to predict water quality. Watershed Function SFA project is developing understanding and tools to measure and predict how droughts, early snowmelt, and other perturbations impact downstream water availability and biogeochemical cycling at episodic to decadal timescales. Finally, ESS-DIVE is a data repository for earth and environmental science data. ESS-DIVE stores and publicly distributes data from observational, experimental, and modeling research funded by the Department of Energy's Office of Science. Now I will discuss 4 approaches to standards. There's no approach, standards applied by the data consumer, standards applied by the data provider, and finally, I will discuss a combined approach that is inspired by the previously mentioned approaches. So no approach means no standards. Data consumers access each data repository separately and transform the data to a custom structure of their choosing. On the positive side, this takes no extra effort on the part of the data provider, but it is lots of effort for the data consumer. The discoverability of each dataset suffers, which means it might not get used or cited and thus reduces the potential scientific impact. In this next approach by Watershed Function SFA and iNIADS, a data brokering framework was developed called Basin 3D that integrates data and metadata from disparate heterogeneous data sources and applies a standard to the metadata and data for use by downstream users, as you can see from this graphic. For downstream users, this increases the discoverability of the data through integrated search across data sources. It removes the variability in the vocabulary, such as variable names, and provides centralized access to download the data. The downside is that it takes considerable effort to apply standards to each data repository and keep up to date with changes in the data and metadata structure. Additionally, integrating new data sources requires efforts by a domain scientist with programming skills. The Basin 3D technology has enabled data integration where project users can search harmonized data across data repositories. It also enables data visualization where users can preview the data to determine its usefulness to their research before download. And scientific analysis of harmonized data is also enabled, as you can see in this Jupyter notebook. In this approach by AmeriFlux, standards are applied by the data provider to the metadata and data. Using this approach, AmeriFlux is able to provide data and metadata in the same standard format, which allows scientists to focus on the science instead of data integration. It also enables an AmeriFlux to execute a centralized QA/QC pipeline for high volumes of data, which results in high-quality data. Finally, discoverability is increased with an integrated cross-site search, which contributed in an increased number of citations from data use. The downsides of this approach are that it requires data providers to take the time to figure out how the reporting format applies to their data, and also the reporting format is strict. If providers have data and data types that are not defined in the reporting format, it is not accepted by the repository. In this approach by NGEE Tropics, the metadata only is provided by the data providers. Providing formatted metadata only allows the data providers more flexibility because they can describe their data in the way that they want. This is very extensible and enables new data types to be added when needed. Some providers viewed this approach as a way to organize and preserve their metadata for the long term. One consumer, a modeler, was able to write a script to use the data from these templates to integrate data from sites across the various tropical regions. This approach, however, does not work well if data providers make mistakes in their metadata, as the data would be untranslatable. Learning the metadata format standard takes time and effort for the providers to understand and apply to their data. Also, the onus is on each data consumer to use each provided metadata format to translate the data themselves. However, it has been demonstrated that a single script could translate any data described by the metadata format. As mentioned previously, ESS-DIVE is a data repository that accepts, stores, and publicly distributes data from observational, experimental, and modeling research. The data in ESS-DIVE is diverse and complex, and the approach that ESS-DIVE is taking aims to reduce the burden on the data providers by working with the community to develop and adopt standards or reporting formats for selected data types. This approach builds on the insights gained from the previously mentioned approaches. It's a combined approach. Data standards or reporting formats will be applied by data providers, and also metadata standards will be applied by data providers. But ESS-DIVE will also accept data with no standards applied and try to parse and make that centrally searchable as well. The ESS-DIVE vision for the future is to make use of these standards by creating what we call a fusion database to enable deeper access into the data. ESS-DIVE is a data repository that allows data providers to create and publish data packages. A data package consists of some high-level metadata such as title, abstract, and authors, plus corresponding data files bundled together in a single package. The purpose of the ESS-DIVE Fusion database is to make any standardized data searchable by extending the search beyond the general data package metadata into the files themselves. We will initially support the most common well-known formats. Towards this goal, we have already created a limited prototype that extracts data from comma-separated values files and provides summary statistics of the data to show feasibility of this approach. We envision a parser for each data standard format that can be applied to any data files which adhere to it. We will develop an automation pipeline of interfaces that allow for automated data extraction, indexing, and error handling. These interfaces will be extensible, allowing us to easily handle new data standard formats as they are adopted. All of this will result in an integrated search for both the package-level metadata and its corresponding scientific data in the ESS-DIVE data portal. Scientists should care about getting involved in how data repositories are being designed and built, since it can enable your science. In the case of ESS-DIVE, we hope that in bringing many of our data sets in one place, we will enhance their findability and accessibility. Through our standards efforts to bring data into common formats, we want to enhance their interoperability and reusability. What this will then enable for the science is first a unified view of the data where you can find the data needed more easily for synthesis and analysis. This table summarizes the approaches of each use case and how they use standards and reporting formats to aid integration of data. The last row shows the ESS-DIVE use case, which, as I mentioned previously, is a vision for the future. The X's indicate what standards are applied and who applies them. The question marks indicate that there's some structure, but that it is most likely not a consensus-based one like standards and reporting formats. While none of the approaches are perfect, we know from our experiences that data integration is important for analysis, synthesis, machine learning, and AI. And standards are essential in whatever the form and whoever applies them. We have already seen the impact to our projects in increased usage and citation. And finally, this is still a work in progress, and we need to make it easier for providers to submit well-structured data and for consumers to discover and use data in their science. Thanks for your time. The projects mentioned in this presentation are funded by the Department of Energy's Office of Science BER program. If you have any questions, contact me at the email listed.